Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
The two main political parties at Westminster have suffered losses in the local elections in England and Northern Ireland in a sign that voters are fed up with the deadlock over Brexit. Now, the Conservatives have lost more than 1,000 seats and Labour has failed to make much progress at a time when opposition parties usually do well. Meanwhile, the Liberal Democrats, who want another EU referendum, the Greens and Independents all did well. Well, nearly 9,000 seats were up for grabs. Counting is still underway and the results are changing. But so far, the Conservatives are down more than 1,100 and Labour around 100. The main winners are the Liberal Democrats, who've gained 595 councillors. Now, if these results were replicated across the country as a whole, the BBC projects the Conservatives and Labour would both get around 28% of the vote, with the Lib Dems on 19 and other parties on 25. Well, our deputy political editor, John Pienaar, has all the details.
After a tough night, Theresa May needed a bit of love.
Thank you.
She didn't need this.
Why don't you resign?
Why don't you resign was the shout.
We don't want you.
We don't want you. It only takes one to spoil the mood. Out, out. They meant him, not her. But bad results needed explaining.
These were always going to be difficult elections for us, and there were some challenging results for us last night, but it was a bad night for Labour too. And I think people were sending a very clear message, a simple message, to both main parties, to us and the Labour Party: just get on and deliver Brexit.
Jeremy Corbyn was trying to ignore the grey clouds today. Labour did worse than many expected. Maybe trying to appeal to Brexiteers and Remainers failed to please enough on either side. His verdict too: Britain needs a Brexit deal. Didn't mention a referendum though.
I think it means there's a huge impetus on every MP, and they've all got that message, whether they themselves are leave or remain, or the people across the country, that an arrangement has to be made, a deal has to be done, and Parliament has to resolve this issue. I think that is very, very clear.
How does it feel to be part of a Liberal Democrat majority?
Felt good for the Lib Dems, winning the Cotswolds and Mole Valley and Bath and North East Somerset, all bound to poll better than 4 years ago, but reason enough to celebrate, echo their big message on Brexit.
I think we are winning the argument, including with many Brexit voters. We're just absolutely fed up with the way the country is stagnating. And I think whether they're pro-Brexit or against it, I think they buy our argument that we now have to go back to the people.
John, Anthony.
It was the big parties competing to see who'd fare worse than expected. Look at these Tory faces in Chelmsford, where they lost control.
Your reaction to the results, Hit? Well, of course,
Hard to take on an exhausting, emotional night. No surprise then that Tory misery provoked more demands for Theresa May to go.
Many of my constituents have said this to me, we need change, we need a change of leadership. Perhaps the time has now come for that.
Not all bad for Labour. They took Tory Trafford, won in places including High Peak, but Labour's lost control and lost seats the party was expected to win. Why? Because Brexit's delayed, or because voters want another referendum? Labour's split.
The feeling is they've been badly let down by national politicians and Labour politicians, and this is the first chance they've had to make that protest, and unfortunately there's a lot of good Labour councillors going to lose their seats, I think, because of it.
Whatever deal it is that the Conservatives in the end are able to get through Parliament, if they're able to, we should go to a confirmatory ballot so that we can find out from the people, is this really what you want?
As for the smaller parties, UKIP's taken a battering, but the Greens are upbeat.
There is an element undeniably about disenchantment with the two big parties. People are fed up with the way they've handled Brexit. There's a cry for clarity, which I think the Greens are offering.
So plenty more evidence of the disintegration of traditional loyalties to the two big parties. These were local elections, and many people may simply have shown they're fed up after years of cuts and austerity. But across the country, we've also seen people are as deadlocked as the parties here at Westminster on the big issue of Brexit. The results may pile pressure on the parties here to somehow break that Brexit deadlock, but they've given no clear indication of how the country wants that done. This was an angry election, ballot papers used to let off steam, often that it's taken so long to make so little progress with Brexit. And as the ballot boxes are stacked and stowed away, there are only weeks before voters get another chance to make their views known in the European Parliament elections, maybe even louder. John Pienaar, BBC News.
So, the Brexit deadlock seems to have been a significant factor in the elections. In the Labour heartland of Sunderland, the party suffered heavy losses but still managed to hang on to control of the council. In Bath, the Conservatives lost control to the Liberal Democrats, who gained 23 seats. Our political correspondent Alex Forsyth reports on the two cities, which both sent clear messages to the main parties.
Bath and North East Somerset has seen a shift in its political landscape. The Conservatives did run the council, but last night the surge in Lib Dem support saw them claim victory here. In this historic city, most people voted to stay in the EU, and while local issues played a part in these elections, there's not a lot of love for how Brexit's been handled.
I think everyone's just fed up with Westminster at the moment, for obvious reasons.
I think so much has gone on in central government that I think it was, bound to happen, really.
This gym design business relies on trade with mainland Europe. Its owner comes from a Tory tradition, but used his 2 votes in these elections to back the Lib Dems and the Green Party.
As a business person, we're beginning to feel more let down by the Tories, whose party infighting and partisan issues have resulted in us careering towards this hard EU exit. So I guess I'm fairly disillusioned with the traditional parties that I've come from, and what we're really looking for now is a new party in the centre, or someone to claim that centre ground.
While these were local elections, the Liberal Democrats' anti-Brexit message has clearly had an impact in Remain-supporting areas like here in Bath. But across the country, voters have turned away from the 2 main parties. In the North East, Sunderland saw Labour keep control of the council, but with a significant drop in support.
Oh, we've voted Labour since I left school, since I was 18 and you could vote. And now just voted Conservative, really protest vote against Labour, because Labour's not doing what people want them to do. MPs want set a referendum, we don't.
From me being a boy, this has been a stronghold for Labour, and they're gradually losing seats. And I think the next time it happens, the next election, you'll see a big shift towards UKIP, I would think.
This coastal city opted to leave, but it wasn't just pro-Brexit parties picking up Labour votes. The Lib Dems and Greens did too.
It's not surprising that people are disillusioned with the 2 main political parties because they haven't delivered on Brexit.
I think they realise that perhaps we need to give some of these smaller parties a chance.
Back in Bath at the Society Cafe, local musician Nick said austerity and the economy mattered to him, but he thought this election was influenced by one thing.
I think there are people who might have chosen differently at the ballot box who chose what they chose purely because of Brexit.
Some activists who suffered local losses have blamed the national picture. Many from both main parties hope the message from these elections will be heard loud and clear in Westminster. Alex Forsyth, BBC News, Bath.
Well, Rita Chakrabarti has been looking at the results from some of the key councils in England, which show how political allegiances have shifted.
This has been a really turbulent election with a lot of council seats changing hands, and the big story has, of course, been the resurgent Liberal Democrats. Some really big gains for them. Look at these councils, Bath and North East Somerset, Chelmsford, both gained from the Conservatives. I want to show you what happened in Chelmsford. The Conservatives had a majority of 47 councillors here. Look, the Lib Dems took it with a majority of 5. And if I just show you the seat change compared to last time, the Conservatives lost 31 seats, the Lib Dems picking up 26. So a really cracking result for the Liberal Democrats in Chelmsford. For the Conservatives, they also lost ground in heartlands like Folkestone and Hythe. That was Conservative. It's now in no overall control. The smaller parties making advances there. Better news for the Conservatives in North East Lincolnshire. They took that council, which was previously hung. Ashfield here in pink, that means that the Independents have won this council. It was in no overall control before, but Labour, in fact, were very strong in Ashfield. the independents have taken that. Let's look now at Labour's performance. They had some real disappointments during this election. Darlington has always been Labour until now. Labour's lost Darlington, a real heartland council. Similar case with the Wirral, and let me take you into the Wirral to just show you the pattern of what happened. Let's have a look at the share change. So this is a change in the share of the vote compared to last time these seats were up for election. Look, Labour's vote going down by 13%. That will really have hurt. But let's just look at the last council on this screen. Trafford, a big metropolitan council that Labour has gained from no overall control. They'll be really pleased with that. So overall, a quite chastening night, certainly for the Conservatives, but also for Labour. A really good performance for the Liberal Democrats, with independents and Greens and other smaller parties coming up too.
Rita Chakrabarti there. Let's talk now to our Deputy Political Editor, John Pienaar, who's at Westminster. John, the results overnight, where do they leave the main parties at Westminster, do you think?
Well, Clive, these results show the sheer rigidity of the Brexit deadlock without pointing the way with any clarity to any solution. Clearly, no solution capable of reuniting the country on both sides of the Brexit divide, from those who want a new referendum to those who want to leave the European Union with no deal. They've been claiming vindication from these elections, and they'll go on claiming vindications from these elections. Meanwhile, the government and the opposition, Team May and Team Corbyn, are still groping towards some kind of compromise deal. That process goes on. But so far, both sides seem to be looking to the other side to come up with some way through, to give ground in a way that might lead to some sort of deal. And Clive, if you think these results have shown the sheer frustration in the country with the two-party system, which again seems to be crumbling as we watch, and with the time it's taken to come up with some sort of solution, whatever it is, to Brexit, well, just wait till you see the European elections in about 3 weeks' time, when Change UK on one side of the spectrum and the Brexit Party on the other will give the country another chance to demonstrate what a discontented and divided country we've become.
OK, John, thank you for that. John Pienaar there at Westminster.
Well, they may not yet agree on a Brexit deal, but Theresa May has concurred with Jeremy Corbyn that the failure to deliver Brexit lies behind their English local election losses. The Conservatives were the biggest losers by far, with most results now in. A short while ago, they were down 1,211 council seats, many in their southern heartlands, and the largest losses for a governing party in decades. But that drubbing wasn't inflicted on them by Labour. They also had a poor night, losing 81 councillors, many of them in traditional Labour areas in the north. The big winners were the Liberal Democrats, who bounced back from terrible results 4 years ago to win 636 council seats, mainly at the expense of the Conservatives. And the Green Party also had a good election, winning 176 seats. There have also been big changes in the control of councils, mostly at the Conservatives' expense. They lost control of 40 councils, while Labour lost 5, with the Lib Dems gaining control of 10. Siobhan Kennedy has been following the results as they came in.
If there's one takeaway from last night, it was that both the Tories and Labour lost out to an invisible third choice on the ballot, the fed-up with Brexit Party, which won in droves across the country. Of course, there was no such choice, and instead here in Bath, as across the UK, voters registered their anger with Brexit paralysis by handing victory to the Liberal Democrats. They took 23 seats away from the Tories here, taking control of the council in the home of the arch-Brexiteer Jacob Rees-Mogg.
I'm his local councillor, and I'll call by on him at the weekend and ask if there's anything I can do to help him.
From Amber Valley in the north to leafy Winchester in the south, the Tories took a drubbing. Theresa May put on a brave face at the Tory Welsh conference, where she was met with this by a man who probably spoke for many.
Thank you, everybody. And
why don't you resign? We don't want you.
Anchorin Honda.
And good afternoon, she said, moving swiftly on as he was frog-marched out.
I think people were sending a very clear message, a simple message, to both main parties, to us and the Labour Party. Just get on and deliver Brexit. That's our responsibility. It's what I'm working for. And I call on the Labour Party and those of my own colleagues who haven't thus far delivered Brexit, backed Brexit, to do so.
Where the Tories took a pounding from the Liberal Democrats, Walsall was at least a win. The Tories also took North East Lincolnshire. Labour's big saving grace was in Trafford, where Jeremy Corbyn was on hand to celebrate a win from no overall control. Elsewhere, there were tears as the Wirral, along with other Labour strongholds like Bolsover, Burnley and Darlington, succumbed to voter frustration with the party.
I think it means there's a huge impetus on every MP, and they've all got that message, whether they themselves are Leave or Remain or the people across the country, that an arrangement has to be made, a deal has to be done, and Parliament has to resolve this issue. I think that is very, very clear, and I think everyone gets that message.
But many in the party are acutely aware they could fare even worse in the upcoming European election. This MP said the party was punished for its confused message on Brexit that pushed supporters away, largely into the arms of independents.
I won't get any plaudits for it within, the Jeremy Corbyn fan club in the Labour Party, but the truth is, looking both ways on Brexit has harmed the Labour Party. The question is, when my colleagues take to the airwaves, are they going to be honest about the extent to which our leader is coming up on the doorstep too? And what is Jeremy Corbyn going to do about it? He should lead or make way for someone else who can.
No doubting whose night it was. The Lib Dems chalked up 17 councils, back on the political radar, at least locally, thanks to Brexit. Here in Chelmsford, one of its biggest wins, it took the council in traditional Tory Essex. Vince Cable, another politician with an eye on the European vote to come.
We expect to do well. We are clearly the dominant, successful Remain party, and we expect everybody to get behind us in that important elections.
The Liberal Democrats' success in taking Chelmsford from the Tories is a sharp illustration of the Conservatives' southern discomfort. Their vote was down 9%, the Lib Dems up by a whopping 20%. Labour had a similar problem in their northern strongholds. In Middlesbrough, a drop of 14% was just one of a dire set of results across the northeast. In the end, the spoiled ballot papers on social media told the story. Local issues inevitably played a part, but all politicians know it wasn't bins voters were angry about, but Brexit. Well, these election results show, if anything, the massive problem that Brexit has become for both parties. We knew that already, of course, but these overnight results, boy, have they confirmed that. The problem is, while they're showing up the pain, they're not offering any solution. And if we think these results are a problem, well, both parties know things could get a whole lot worse in the next few weeks if the European elections go ahead, as many believe that they will. Of course, the Brexit bogeyman Nigel Farage is due to pop up again. He's leading the polls with his Brexit party, and on the other side, Change UK is hoping to hoover up the angry Remain voters. Now, one way, of course, for both parties to avoid that is for Tories and Labour to come together. Later this afternoon, both Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May went on camera to say that they were determined to try and get a deal over the line in the coming days. We are told that talks will resume between the two parties after the bank holiday weekend. But let's face it, we have been here before, haven't we, for months, and yet no agreement has been reached. And regardless really of today's dual drubbing, the underlying same issues and tensions remain. So the big question will be whether or not they are able this time, after these elections, to find a way through.
Siobhan Kennedy, thanks very much. Well, as Siobhan was saying, Labour's night wasn't quite as bad as the Conservatives, but they still lost seats pretty heavily, with particularly worrying results for them in what would normally be considered Labour strongholds in the north. Our North of England correspondent Claire Fallon is in Ellesmere Port in Cheshire, where Labour has just lost control of one more council. Claire.
Well, even though Jeremy Corbyn headed up to the north first thing this morning to go to an area where his party had won, to do what party leaders do and talk up their results, it's not exactly been this huge celebratory victory party for him in the north today. So take Cheshire West and Chester. They were counting the results here until about an hour ago at this leisure centre, and that's when we had the final confirmation that Labour has lost overall control of this council. It was fairly tight already between Labour and the Tories. They are still the biggest party, but no longer absolutely in control. The common theme, if there has been one, is the drift of support to smaller parties, but also to uber-local parties focusing in on local issues in their areas. And that has seen support sliding away from Labour, even in core Labour places like Barnsley, for example, where the Labour Party say that they had their worst night for 15 years. And then, of course, there is Brexit, which frankly, in the north, is like some kind of impossible Rubik's Cube for the Labour Party, because the reality is many Labour areas are the areas that voted leave. The first vote since the Brexit day that wasn't, the first big test of what people think and feel, and one big theme. This was the night of the other, the not you and the not you either. What do you think is going on this evening?
I think we've got the dissatisfaction with the leadership of the council.
And there's a lot of anger out there.
Absolutely, with what's been done to Curzon. This is nothing to do with Brexit, this result.
Nothing at all?
Nothing at all to do with Brexit. It's all to do with the removal of services from our town of Curzon.
It added up to a bad night for Labour across much of the north. In Bolton, they are still the biggest party, but only just after losing 7 seats. Are you still going to be the leader of this council?
I have no idea.
And Brexit's not irrelevant as far as their leader's concerned.
There's so much anger out there because parts of the town have been really affected a lot more than others. And I would say that's why you've got your Falmouth and Kersleys, because people just don't believe that anybody's interested in them anymore.
Another Labour council in the Labour heartland, a red ward in red as it gets Ashton-under-Lyne, with a big name MP to lend support and pose for selfies on the Labour campaign trail. In every single general election since before the Second World War, this area has been Labour. And it's the same in local elections since the ward was created in 2004. It's been Labour, Labour, Labour. That was until last night. Because last night, the winner here was Green. And while losing 1 seat on a local council hardly counts as a political earthquake, that Colin switched to Green is a pretty big thing, because Colin is a lifelong Labour supporter and a committed Leaver who's just voted for a pro-Remain party.
To be honest with you, I did that just to sort the system up. I didn't want to vote for. I didn't want to vote for Labour or Conservative, so I voted for Green Party.
So, as a Leaver, you voted for a Remain party just because you didn't want to vote for the other two?
Yeah.
Do you think a lot of people did the same?
Yes, I know they did.
I've been Labour for about, I'd say, I'm 35, so let's say nearly 15 years. My dad was pro-Labour as well. But then, like I say, with the area and the mess that it is at the moment, the broken glass, the rubbish on the streets and what have you. I mean, my friend were talking about it yesterday. We said, let's go and vote for Green.
Everyone wants change. Independent parties have gained a lot of seats, and so has the Green Party, so it's the way forward. People want change.
And change is what they got. Just not in the obvious two-party politics way of swinging from one big side to the other. As with the referendum itself, how the North voted wasn't just about Brexit. As with so much right now, it's more complicated than that.
Claire Fallon reporting there. Well, earlier I spoke to the Education Secretary, Damien Hinds, and Shadow Foreign Secretary, Emily Thornberry. I began by asking Damien Hinds whether he thought these election results were disastrous for the Conservative Party.
Yeah, this was a clear message from the electorate. We got it in the result. Actually, to be fair, I think we all got it as well when we were knocking on doors, talking to people directly. It's a clear message that there has been frustration, and particularly on this big issue of Brexit, we need to get on with it and get it done.
come back to Brexit, but there was also a clear message about your leader as well, wasn't there? And the activist Stuart Davies, who heckled her, spoke for many. She's got to go, hasn't she?
Well, I think the Prime Minister has done a remarkable job and shown incredible drive and tenacity in what has been a very difficult negotiation with the European Union.
Will you compromise on the issue of the customs union, some kind of permanent, semi-permanent customs union? Then you'd have the deal. Labour would sign up to that.
Well, look, the discussions with the Labour Party are going on. I'm not in the room for those discussions, but we'll see how they progress.
Yeah, but you're in the cabinet. I'm asking you about that point on the customs union. Yeah.
I'm coming on to that. So, look, on the point of wanting to have the best possible customs arrangements with the European Union, I mean, we agree with that, and that is written into the deal that the UK has negotiated. And I think it's the reason I said I'm not in the room for those discussions is, you know, it's important to hear from the Labour Party what it is in their proposal, their kind of version of customs arrangements, like a full customs union. What is in that isn't in the negotiated deal? Because actually the deal in many ways gets the best of both worlds. It gets the good features of a customs union, but without the drawbacks.
Well, let me right now bring Emily Thornberry, Shadow Foreign Secretary, in to answer that point. What is it you want that you'd sign up to on the customs union?
Well, there isn't a permanent customs union in Theresa May's deal. There isn't close alignment of rules and regulations that we need to have a place in the single market.
And permanent customs union is your red line, or would you go for a semi-permanent?
No, that we need to have. We've always said. I did Prime Minister's Questions like 2.5 years ago, and I said that on our side of the House, we believe that the only way that we can have a soft border in Northern Ireland, look after jobs and the economy, is to be in a customs union. We have been completely consistent about that, but that isn't all. I mean, there are a number of other issues as well.
But this is why voters are so frustrated with both main parties. Theresa May says, let's get on and deliver Brexit. Jeremy Corbyn says a deal has to be done. And then I ask you both now, what kind of deal? What does that look like? And you're both completely intransigent. So a deal won't get done, will it?
No, Cathy, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not saying intransigence at all. It is true that the negotiated deal is itself involves, you know, balance and trade-off and compromise, but we're having these talks entered into in good faith and being done constructively, I think, on both sides with the Labour Party. That's a good thing, to try and understand where these points of difference might be. And actually, I think on many things, I think we can have agreement.
How keen are you to get a deal with Labour so you can cancel the European elections? When you look at what happened last night, what might happen in the European elections? I mean, you're facing Armageddon then, aren't you?
Look, I'm mad keen as mustard to get a deal over the line. And, you know, I think 3 years after the referendum, people would rightly be, well, frustrated, probably puts it mildly.
So you would be obliterated, though, in the European elections, wouldn't you? I mean, people couldn't vote for the Brexit Party now. Even your own members are planning to vote for the Brexit Party, some of them.
Look, I don't think I'd be giving away any trade secrets to say, you know, most people in the Conservative Party recognise that fighting the European elections, that is a tall order.
Damien Hinds, thank you very much. Let's turn now to Emily Thornberry. You heard what he said there about a second referendum. Can you be any clearer? Because there is a theory today that you've been punished for failing to be clearer on that issue of a second referendum.
Yeah, I mean, I think listening to people in the local elections, I think that it's right that people are fed up and they want us to get on with it. And they want the issue of Brexit to be resolved. And some people, some Labour voters have moved their vote to the Greens or to the Lib Dems because they think the answer to that is for us to remain. And some have moved them to UKIP because they think the answer is for us to leave with no deal.
Last night, you should have been gaining hundreds of seats. It was not the performance of a government in waiting, was it?
I think it was mixed results. I think there certainly isn't an equivocation. You can't say the Tories did badly, Labour did badly. I mean, obviously, you know, the Tories are losing, you know, over 1,000 seats. And
you should be picking them up in droves, ready to go into number 10.
And if you look at, and certainly, as I say, it's mixed. So there are certain councils that we've lost control over, you know, which is, you know, really sad that we have. But also, you know, we've won control of Amber Valley. There are a number of other councils, and if you look at some of the key marginal seats, like South Swindon, like Plymouth Moorside, like Thurrock, you know, if those results were translated into a general election, we'd be winning those marginal seats. So it's a mixed picture. It's a mixed picture.
The fact that you're not storming ahead is in part, at least, in large part, some people say, because of your leader. I mean, the actor and activist, Tony Robinson, who's been a supporter of Labour for 45 years, he's left in large part, he says, because of Jeremy Corbyn.
I think it's really sad that Tony's left, and I, you know, will miss him. But I think that actually, what I learned from the elections was that two things. One was that they really want us to move on from Brexit, and they really want that sorted out. And they also want us to be talking about something else.
Nothing to do with Jeremy Corbyn at all.
And where we have been doing well, it's where we've been able to get people to focus on issues other than Brexit, the bread and butter issues, where we do have an alternative, where after 9 years of austerity, there is another way.
Did Jeremy Corbyn's leadership have anything to do with last night's results?
I mean, I've been a member of the Labour Party for
a yes or no?
A long time? No. And every time there's been an election, I've been told by people on the doorstep, if you change your leader, I don't like X, I don't like Y, get someone else and I'll vote Labour. I mean, I hear it all the time. I think that...
And you heard it all the time this time about Jeremy Corbyn?
You hear it. I mean, I've heard it all the time over the years, over the last 40 years I've heard it. You know, and it's a very difficult job being leader of the opposition, particularly Labour leader of the opposition, particularly given the way in which the print media behaves towards the leader of the opposition when they're Labour. It is very difficult. And of course, people will pick up on that. But what's important is what politicians will do to change people's lives for the better. And when we're measured against that, we can knock the Tories out the park.
Emily Thornberry, thank you very much.
Well, the biggest winners in the election are the Liberal Democrats, and joining me now is their education spokesperson, Layla Moran, who's also tipped to take over from Vince Cable as leader when he stands down later this year. Thanks very much for coming in. There's no question it was a good night for you. What was your best tactic? Was it not being Tory or Labour?
Well, across the country, actually, one of the tactics we had was that we are clear about where we stand on Brexit. And the reason why that was important was Leave voters, you know where we are. They said, and I saw this when I was knocking up, oh, yeah, we don't agree on that, but let's talk about the other stuff. And we were able to move on.
But that taps into the fact this is a protest vote, isn't it?
No, not at all, because you move on, then you talk about things like the recycling, the bins. And you have to remember, a lot of the places where we've made gains, places like the Vale of Whitehorse District Council in my area of Oxfordshire, we've held before. People have a history with the Liberal Democrats. This is not just a shallow resurgence. This is coming from somewhere. People know that Liberal Democrat councillors do well by their communities. They listen to them. You know, I think this says we are here and we're here to stay and we're back.
But as you say, you have history. You know, you've done well in local elections before, but been unable to translate that into parliamentary power, which is essential if you really want to influence things.
And over time, that's true. But actually, you've got to remember, you know, we always have localism at the heart of what liberalism is. It's about communities leading from the front. This is an important part of what Liberal Democrats are, and that's
But you're not saying this election was not about Brexit fundamentally, are you?
It was a whole host of different factors. Of course the national picture played in. Of course it did. And of course, we were coming from a low base, but I would accept that, only those factors, if it was maybe 300 or 400. As we're talking now, we're eking towards 700 new Liberal Democrat councillors. That's the best election at local level we've had in our party's history.
Your leader today, Vince Cable, urged people to get behind the Liberal Democrats in the coming Euro election, saying the message is very clear. You know, every vote for the Liberal Democrats was a vote to stop Brexit. The problem is, at the Euro elections, you'll be facing other pro-Remain parties, and that vote will just be split.
So, absolutely, we are very clear on that message. Stop Brexit. You know, we're not hiding anything. And yes, there are other parties. We have a different voting system there, though. Under first past the post, which is what we've contested these, actually, we did some deals with the Greens. So in Oxfordshire, we actually stood down for them and vice versa. It's a different, more proportional system at the Europeans. But it is true that we have shown ourselves to be a credible party with a big machine behind us. It's all very well to say this is what we stand for, but actually the campaign matters. And if you want to stop Brexit, vote Liberal Democrat.
And leaders matter. Sir Vince Cable is to stand down very soon. Your own leadership ambitions?
Today is not about that. But what I will say is that Vince Cable now leaves an extraordinary legacy for his leadership, and I think he should be incredibly proud of what we've achieved.
One you'd like to take up?
Not about me today.
Layla Moran, thanks very much for coming in.
Local elections are traditionally events where voters deliver their mid-term message to the parties. Tonight, though, nothing is so straightforward except for one stark fact. Almost wherever you look, this year's elections have been terrible for the two main parties. Across English councils, the Conservatives hemorrhaged more than 1,300 seats, with Theresa May heckled by her own supporters. It's the worst local election performance by any party since John Major's Conservatives in 1995. Labour also suffered its own losses, while independent candidates and the pro-EU Lib Dems and Greens emerged winners. Both main parties say the result is a clear signal that a Brexit solution must be found. Others say it shows voter disillusionment with mainstream politics grows deeper and deeper.
Oh, now look at this. How about that?
After the day the Prime Minister's had, there are many wondering if they could do her job. But in Grimsby tonight, at least the competition was friendly. This is one of the only places the Conservatives made gains in the local elections, as Theresa May acknowledged a Brexit backlash.
Now, because we haven't delivered the Brexit deal through Parliament yet, this was going to be a particularly challenging set of elections for both main parties. And as the party that has been in government for 9 years, it was, of course, always going to be particularly difficult for us.
Wherever she went today, there was no escaping the results, not even somewhere that didn't declare any. These were Welsh Conservatives angry at English losses.
Why don't you resign?
This heckler used to do PR for Boris Johnson. Perhaps he still does.
And Bryn Honda.
That's almost Welsh for good afternoon. But today the Conservatives had one of their worst. For both main parties, it was hands up who'd had the biggest disaster. But the Conservatives lost the most seats, more than 1,300, giving away councils like Peterborough, Basildon and St Albans. Voters' frustration scrawled across ballot papers, a local vote, but in many ways a national protest. Labour should have had far more to cheer about, but after 9 years in opposition, they too went backwards, losing more councils than they won. And having tried to please all voters, does Jeremy Corbyn accept he may have pleased none? Perhaps hinting tonight at a deal with the government to finally get Brexit done.
I think it means there's a huge impetus on every MP, and they've all got that message, whether they themselves are leave or remain, or the people across the country, that an arrangement has to be made, a deal has to be done, and Parliament has to resolve this issue.
But there was an upside to Brexit for parties which oppose it. The Lib Dems making their biggest ever gains, taking councils like Bath and Chelmsford.
I think it's a combination of things. People are very dissatisfied with the Conservative government. It's an absolute mess. The Labour Party sitting on the fence of the big issue of the day. But a lot of it is local campaigning, local government. We believe in local government. We do it well.
In a series of awkward moments for the major parties, there were big gains for the pro-European Greens too, as well as independent candidates.
We're seeing a kind of break-up of the political system and people looking around for new options, new choices. And we've got a very, very clear message, of course, on Brexit.
And what hasn't been counted is support for new parties which didn't stand in these elections. Whether pro or anti-Brexit, they will appear on ballot papers later this month.
Well, frankly, I think this is likely to be the calm before the storm. For the major parties in particular, the European Parliament elections are likely to be a car crash, really. It seems now odds on that Nigel Farage's new Brexit party would probably top the poll.
So while there are always the cheers and the tears, these elections aren't just a local upset, but a national one too. Paul Brand, News at 10.
Well, the sheer extent of the Conservative meltdown took even party pessimists by surprise. We've now had all of the results from England's local elections. The Conservatives have 3,562 councillors, a loss of 1,334, their worst performance in 24 years. But as we've said, Labour suffered too, losing 82 seats, leaving them with 2,023 councillors. The Lib Dems did well, gaining 703. The Greens gained 194 seats, with UKIP losing 145. And there was success for independent candidates too. The others are up 662. Well, counting only started in Northern Ireland today, and the full results won't be known until a bit later or even tomorrow. So far, the Democratic Unionists have 52 seats, while Sinn Féin have 41. The Ulster Unionists currently have 34 councillors. Well, no place illustrated the Tory plight quite as vividly as Chelmsford in Essex, where their comfortable majority was overturned by the Lib Dems.
This Orange Army is back on the march. Chelmsford Council, Conservative for years, was more than 2/3 Tory, but now more than half the councillors are Lib Dem. How are you feeling today?
Absolutely elated. It's a wonderful result, not just for us, but for Chelmsford.
You know, we've got so much to offer. Yeah. Our ideas, the possibility of change, and looking, you know, I really can't explain how happy I am about what's happened here.
But the Conservative who led the council here for 16 years is rather less chuffed. What happened?
Mrs May, I suspect, really is the simple answer to that question. On the doorstep, Brexit was the only subject. On ballot papers, I've never seen so many spoiled ballot papers. I mean, hundreds of spoiled ballot papers with "you are incompetent, I'm never going to vote for you again."
What do you think Mrs May now needs to do?
Our view is here that she is a liability, I'm sorry to say, and she should resign, and it's a pity she hadn't resigned 2 or 3 days ago.
But what makes the Lib Dem gains here so remarkable is that Essex is strong Brexit territory. So why might voters here be stepping out with the most anti-Brexit of parties? Well, at Hampton Social Club, the Tory voters said they'd stayed at home.
I mean, I've always voted Conservative, but I certainly didn't this time. And, you know, I think it just reflects that people are fed up.
I didn't vote.
Because?
Because I'm so fed up with the situation with the Conservative. Well, I wouldn't vote Labour anyway, but certainly in the next general election, I'd certainly vote for the Liberals.
Possibly it's because of what's been going on at Westminster. That's probably it. And I think that's going to ruin just about everything.
It's certainly not doing the Tories any favours here. But despite their disastrous night, Labour didn't pick up a single seat here. Brexit is reshaping the political landscape in new and sometimes quite unexpected ways. Carl Dinnan, News at 10, Chelmsford.
Labour's setbacks meant they totally failed to make any big overall gains against a government beset by division and difficulty. The party even suffered in some of its staunchest traditional heartlands, such as Bolsover in Derbyshire. There, some residents who are normally Labour supporters have been telling us why they took their votes elsewhere.
Its famous castle dates back to medieval times, and for almost as long, it seems, Bolsover has been a Labour stronghold. But the area's changing, coal mines giving way to distribution centres, and the political landscape is changing too. The Labour losses here were far worse than predicted. Almost half the seats went to independents. At the town's chippy, they say, people have lost faith in Labour, many not bothering to vote.
Because we've stopped believing that they'll not help the town like they used to. I do believe it's that. That's why I didn't vote. I was like, there's no point, they're not listening.
154, please.
At the grocers across the road, confusion over Labour's Brexit policy was one factor they felt, complacency a bigger one.
Why do you think people have deserted them in such large numbers?
I think the town's probably ready for a change. I think people want to see things changing for the better, and I think it's probably worth, or people think it's worth them taking a risk on something new.
Ross Walker is one of the independents they risked voting for. Failings to deliver on local issues, he says, explains his victory.
I'm under no illusions this is Labour heartland.
I've dealt with people here who are struggling, and I've had no support from the Labour Party, from the Labour Council. I've had no support. It's the charities which are picking it up, and that's not on.
The outgoing council leader rejects that criticism, instead blaming Labour's Brexit policy for failing to offer any real clarity.
Everybody wants to talk about Brexit, and they don't feel, don't feel that we can, whatever we say about it, they want a yes, no, really. That's what they want.
And Jeremy Corbyn hasn't provided that.
I don't think that the local, on the street, they understand the rather subtle position that the party have taken up nationally.
You've paid a heavy price for that. You must be pretty angry.
I'm very disappointed.
It's a blow that can't easily be brushed aside. This Labour bastion under threat as never before. Libby Vina, News at 10, Bolsover.
Well, our political editor, Robert Peston, joins me now. So a horror story for both of the main parties. Robert, why don't you start with the Tories?
Well, certainly the most extraordinary local elections that I've ever witnessed. As you say, an extraordinary slump by the Tories, losing more than 1,300 seats. Their worst result since the nadir, the low point of John Major in 1995. Now, that previous slump was followed 2 years later by the Tony Blair Labour landslide. I think it's unlikely that that's what we're staring at on this occasion, because Labour themselves did way worse than anybody expected. They were expected to gain certainly a couple of hundred seats. They lost, 70, 80 seats. And the share of the vote that both parties got went from 40% plus at the last general election to less than 30% this time. The big winner were the Liberal Democrats, again doing way better than anybody expected. Now, the Liberal Democrats are associated with a single policy, which is they don't want to leave the EU. They do want a Brexit referendum, and Brexit in general overshadowed this entire election.
And both Theresa May and the Labour leader believe that the way back through this potentially is through a deal on Brexit. Talk us through that, because that's what looms ahead immediately next week. Does that mean we see more potential future for this idea of a deal between the two?
Two things loom ahead. I should point out that enormous numbers of Tories, actually we saw that in the films we've just seen, want Theresa May to go. She will be under enormous pressure again to quit next week. She herself will make a last-ditch attempt through talks with the Labour Party to do a Brexit deal with Labour that might see some version of her Brexit plan approved by MPs. Now, my own view would be that that will not happen for two reasons. Tory MPs are desperate to stop what they see as a Labour form of customs union Brexit, and Labour MPs are desperate to stop Jeremy Corbyn propping up the Tory government. And in particular, they would say the biggest thing weighing on the Tories is their failure to get Brexit, and therefore, if Brexit is delivered, you see a Tory revival, but not a Labour revival.
OK, let's pause and take a breath. We'll be back with more of this, we know, throughout all of next week when those talks get going again. Robert, thank you.
The people have spoken, and it's not good for the two main parties. And with elections to the European Parliament just 3 weeks away, it could easily get worse. A general election based on yesterday's local election results would give the Conservatives and Labour around 28% each nationally, leaving both dozens of seats short for a majority in Parliament. The two main parties lost heavily to the Liberal Democrats and Greens yesterday. Add in the Brexit Party as well as Change UK, and the dynamics of forming a working majority in a future Parliament look even more daunting. Our political editor Nick Watt has this report.
Why don't you resign?
A painful moment for a beleaguered Prime Minister. A brave face in the rain. But similar messages after voters punished Britain's two main parties for their failure to deliver on, or conversely to halt, Brexit.
I think what people were saying to both main parties last night was just get on just deliver Brexit.
I think it means there's a huge impetus on every MP, and they've all got that message, whether they themselves are leave or remain, or the people across the country, that an arrangement has to be made, a deal has to be done, and Parliament has to resolve this issue.
In a divided country, Brexiteers were unimpressed, while Remainers said the night belonged to pro-European parties. The Liberal Democrats were the clear winners, with 703 gains. The Greens put in one of their best performances with 194 gains. The Tories waved goodbye to 1,334 councillors, though losses were expected. These seats were last contested when David Cameron won the 2015 general election. Labour lost 82 councillors, hardly the performance of an opposition on the brink of power. A long-awaited moment of celebration for the Lib Dems. In a world crying out for change, it's a 75-year-old on the verge of retiring from frontline politics who has the biggest smile on his face today. The Liberal Democrats have been helped in part by a natural turn of the electoral cycle, but there's also a clear message to the two main parties: a plague on both your houses. Vince Cable, over the last decade, it's not necessarily been a happy day for the Liberal Democrats on the campaign trail. A different story today.
Yes, no, this is the best result for at least 15 years, maybe for a quarter of a century. And, Chelmsford is a great success, remarkable actually, but it's also true across the country.
From their seaside heartland in Brighton, the Greens celebrated wins across the country.
I do feel that Labour was guilty of an own goal with their constant fudging on Brexit, and sooner or later they are going to have to make a choice. Either way, they seem to be losing out at the moment, and it's a green game. But I think the wider picture is, and what is even more important than whether we stay in Europe or not, is the climate emergency.
Success for the Greens and the Lib Dems is alarming Labour pro-Europeans.
Labour is losing votes down here in the south because of not being Remain enough, and is losing votes in other parts of the country because it's not Leave enough, and that's simply because the party has tried to make a decision of not be Remain or Leave at all. I think it's a misinterpretation of what the country are really asking. What the country, I believe, are saying is, say what's in your heart. As a political party, say what you think is in the best interests of our country and fight for it.
Unhappiness amongst the big guns as the smaller parties scooped up a large protest vote. But in 3 weeks' time, angry voters could head to Nigel Farage's Brexit party in the European elections. Senior Brexiteer Tories will stand by their party, though there are nerves.
When it comes to the prospect of European elections, of course people will be outraged that we are having European parliamentary elections when we should have left on the 29th of March. I personally think it is inevitable that there will be another protest, and that protest will be very much anti-EU. I suspect in some quarters people might feel that it could become a second referendum, effectively, on people venting how they feel about how the Brexit discussions stroke negotiations have gone, why haven't we left.
Hardly a sense of calm tonight for the two main parties, though they are still standing. In a matter of weeks, it may be a different story.
Well, Nick, what is here now? I mean, just listening to the similarity of the verdict that Theresa May and Jeremy Corbyn put, that we need to get on with things. Is there any way they could get on so expeditiously that these European elections would actually not have to be held?
In a word, no. Theresa May is dreading these elections, but she knows that she can't stop them. Jeremy Corbyn knows the danger of these elections because it's essentially showing the failure of the political class to deliver Brexit, although there are some Labour people who think it'll be far more painful for the Tories, but there is an attempt to mitigate that pain by, hopefully, in their eyes, reaching a deal on Brexit in the next week or week and a half or so. And if they did that, then by the time you had these elections on the 23rd of May, it would be clear that the UK would be leaving the EU at the end of June, and those MEPs wouldn't have to take their seat.
I mean, the events past 24 hours certainly seem to raise the stakes for both of them individually.
Yeah, the stakes are very high for them, but they're very different. So for the Conservatives, whose supporters, voters are overwhelmingly Leave, if they don't deliver Brexit by the time of those European parliamentary elections, it could be a devastating moment for them at the ballot box. For Labour, their voters are strongly Remain. So if they are seen to deliver a Brexit with the Conservatives, that could be quite difficult and dangerous for them. For Theresa May personally, I was talking to Priti Patel there earlier on today. She said the Prime Minister must name a date for her departure from number 10. And I understand from senior Tories that if the Conservatives do have a very bad result on the 23rd of May, one poll had them in third place at 13%, that could change the numbers on the 1922 committee. They could then trigger a no confidence vote, and it would be quite a challenge for the Prime Minister to survive that.
Nick, thank you very much. Well, before we came on air, I spoke to the Education Secretary, Damien Hines, and asked him how on earth Theresa May had come to the conclusion that this was a message to get on with Brexit when so many voters had turned to Remain supporting parties.
Well, to be fair, I think many of us knew, and the Prime Minister knew before the results came in last night, that people were saying get on with Brexit. And you know, if we were in any doubt before we'd knocked on people's doors during this campaign, we certainly weren't after it. People do want us to get on with it. You're right, of course, there were also gains for some of the smaller parties, and including parties in favour of staying in the European Union. But this has always been a feature of this subject, that there isn't a single, a single view that people coalesce around. There are very strongly held pro-Remain views and very strongly held kind of pure Brexit views. Our job is to find a way through that works for most people.
Well, people may well be polarised on the issue of Brexit, but for you to lose getting on for 1,200 seats, that's got to be a comment on the public's lack of faith in the leadership of the Conservative Party, hasn't it?
Look, clearly it's a disappointing result. It's a bad result. We've lost colleagues, councillors, hard-working councillors doing their best for their local residents, and I really, really regret that. And obviously, you can't say that when you lose seats that that's anything other than a disappointing result. I mean, it is compared to a high point from 2015, and we know that when governments are at this point in the political cycle, they have a bad time electorally, as did the Labour Party when they were 9 years in. But what's different on this occasion is that we've had a difficult night, but so have the Labour Party. And I think it does come back to the point you were making before. There is a clear message out there to the whole of the political system, which is, we expect you to get on and do this big thing, Brexit. So actually,
well, that's not
we're
the
not
message.
spending all our time talking about Brexit in future. We'd be talking about education, which I'd like to be talking to you about, and all the other things that people care about.
Yes, but that, with respect, that's not the message that all those people voting Lib Dem and Green sent. It may
not
be.
Those ones.
It may be, if there's a huge vote for the Brexit Party in the next election, that is indeed a message to get on. But look, if the message is get on with it, surely they should have voted Conservative then.
Look, there is disappointment and disillusion and an erosion of trust, not just with us, but including with us. We're the party of government, after all, but also actually with the Labour Party.
You've got to fight another election in basically a fortnight, haven't you? And what's your pitch going to be to the public for that election?
I don't think there's any doubt, Mark, that the European elections are a very difficult prospect. A difficult prospect for us and indeed for others as well. We didn't want to be here. We should have left the European Union on the 29th of March. That's what I consistently voted in Parliament to do. But there is a legal position that we have to have these elections. I mean, it's still like that we didn't have to fight them, or if we have to fight the elections, then those newly elected would-be members of the European Parliament never have to take up their seats. But this all relies on us really accelerating. The job has been urgent for some time, and it's now more urgent than ever.
What is your pitch? What is your pitch going to be then in 2 weeks' time? Trust us, we know what we're doing. I mean, people seem to doubt that on the basis of yesterday.
Well, our pitch will be that we have good candidates, we have good sitting members, and they're worthy of support. They're good public servants, but no one's under any illusion, I don't think, that it's going to be a normal election.
Will it finish off Theresa May?
Look, I think the Prime Minister has done truly a remarkable job in negotiating with our team of diplomats, negotiating the deal with the European Union and sticking with it through, some very, very difficult times. And all the while, unlike the other side, but on our side, all the while having to not only be negotiating with them, but also, there were multiple negotiations and issues going on at home. And I think she has done that with remarkable drive and
inability to keep her own party together, effectively. That's...
Well, I don't think we can look to anybody else.
Truth.
No, we need to look to ourselves. We all have responsibility. Every one of us who's a member of the parliamentary party, and indeed more broadly as well. There is much, much, much more that unites us than that we disagree on.
Damien Hinds, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Now, to discuss these tectonic shifts in the political scene, we're joined by a panel of eminent party seismologists. Polly Mackenzie, former Special Advisor to Deputy PM Nick Clegg, Suzanne Evans, spokesperson for Leavers of Britain, Sienna Rogers, editor of Labour List, and Laura Trott, former Special Advisor to David Cameron. Welcome to all of you. If I could just start off with getting a headline view from each of you, what's the big takeaway from this? Sienna?
I think my big takeaway is firstly that this has been a disastrous set of results for the Tories. They were doing some serious expectation management. They were saying, we might lose up to 1,000 seats. And actually, they've lost even more than that, over 1,300 seats. The other thing I'd say is, it has been a disappointing set of results for Labour. We should be worried about places like Bolsover, Ashfield, Derby, those small towns that we've been losing. But at the same time, there are some interesting gains that were made. And a lot of them overlapped with marginal constituencies, which is interesting for the next general election.
Laura Trott?
Labour's hands have been dipped in blood where it comes to delivering Brexit now. And I think that they are going to have to focus on the need to get something done, and they're being held accountable for it. I think the other thing which is interesting is the EU elections are now going to be a referendum with, I think, the Lib Dems and the Brexit Party being proxies.
Yes, this is about Brexit. It feels to me like voters have done this as a practice run for the European elections. And I think what speaks most loudly to me about that being the truth of the situation is the sheer amount of spoiled ballot papers that we've seen. Unprecedented numbers. You sometimes get half a dozen,
like 30,000, isn't it?
Well, yeah, 1,000 in Great Yarmouth, 800 in Basildon, 350 in the Labour heartland of Bolsover. People are very angry, very frustrated. It's been a bloodbath for both the main parties because of Brexit. It's the warm-up for 3 weeks' time.
Multi-party politics is back because we have this incredibly divided nation with all sorts of complicated ideas and opinions, very geographically divergent as well. People thought that the Liberal Democrats were dead after 2015. Turns out they were only sleeping, and they're back, forced to be reckoned with.
Thank you. We'll come back for a fuller discussion of these issues in just a moment. But yesterday's election results were bad for the Conservatives, of course, but not quite as awful as their local election wipeout in 1995, when John Major's government was faltering and Tony Blair was set to achieve a Labour landslide. Well, things look rather different for the party today. To reflect on that, Labour's shadow Northern Ireland Secretary Tony Lloyd joins us. He's MP for Rochdale, which Labour has held in the local elections. Tony Lloyd, welcome.
Thank you.
This was a grim night for Labour, wasn't it, on the basis essentially of its Brexit policy?
Do you know, the idea that you can really make an equivalence between a Conservative Party that lost the 1,300 seats and Labour who lost well under 100 is frankly ridiculous. Yes, of course we're disappointed, but the reality is this: we've been caught in that squeeze. Where the public saw us as part of the parliamentary system that hasn't delivered. Now, actually...
Well, you haven't.
The Labour Party is not the government, and we don't have a majority.
But you have been talking to them about a deal, and you haven't delivered that.
Of course. Well, they haven't delivered, because Theresa May has to come off her red lines. Labour's been very clear. We're the only party that has sought to reach out to other parties in different directions. I've voted in recent weeks for, obviously, for a customs agreement policy, Common Market 2.0. I've voted in favour of public votes because we have been trying to find where we can build that coalition, that majority in Parliament that can deliver for the people of Britain. Now, I don't blame the public for blaming all politicians. That's perhaps a reasonable point at this where we are. But we have got to get through this.
Yeah, but it wasn't a bad night for the Liberal Democrats, was it? When you say blame all politicians, a party with a clear position on Brexit seems to have done much better than a party with your position on Brexit, frankly.
Do you really honestly believe that a party that got something like 2/3 of the popular vote that the Labour Party got did better? If my football team lost 3-2, I don't think I'd say we'd won the game. Now, obviously, the Lib Dems have done very well, and I congratulate them on that. The reality, though, is this, is that they've played a niche role in this, and one that's been successful in different ways. Even their own spokespeople have been saying today, though, that the reasons people voted Lib Dem varied enormously. Some clearly on the basis of their Remain position, but some actually in terms of local issues, some actually because they're the recipient of the anti-politician vote. But now, in that sense, we've suffered from that, but we, in the end, we will get up, we'll carry on to fight for what is the national interest of this country.
OK, well, you can interpret it as a vote against all politicians, but what's your interpretation of the loss of control of somewhere like Bolsover Council? I'm going to quote you something that the outgoing Labour leader Anne Surratt said today. What we've met on the doorstep is that it's just not clear to people what Labour means on Brexit. It simply isn't clear. Now, that's the verdict of your now ex-council leader in Bolsover. That must be a blow to lose control of an authority like that.
Well, I could trade you the fact, for example, in the north of England, that we gained control of the historic Tory flagship of Trafford. In the south of England, in Kent, we gained control of Folkestone. Now, but that, in a sense, is pointless, just to go, we did this, they did that. There is an issue that we may not have got across what Labour's been trying to do. But I repeat what I said before. We know what we've got to try to do for this country. We've got to build a majority in Parliament. There isn't, I don't think at the moment, a majority for a public vote. It may well be if Parliament can't come to any other conclusion, if Theresa May comes back with her own particularly difficult form of Brexit, or the hardline Brexiteers come back, then we would end up pushing for that public vote.
When you say, sorry to interrupt, when you say you know what to do, you have a leader of the Labour Party and you've lost seats in 3 of the 4 local elections while he's been leader. Does changing leader play any part in your prescription of what to do?
Would this be the same Jeremy Corbyn who led the Labour Party that did quite badly in the local elections in the run-up to the 2017 election, but then saw spectacular Labour gains a few weeks later when we were able to...
He didn't win, though, did he?
We were able to put to the public, though, a policy agenda that the public then began to listen to. The problem at the moment, and I totally concede this, is that Brexit is the dominant issue in British politics. Issues, David Hines said before, he wants to talk about education. We'd love to talk about education cuts. We'd love to talk about cuts in the health service. We'd love to talk the erosion of our public services, the way our councils have been hit. But that message actually did get across in some parts, but didn't get across consistently because Brexit dominated the issue.
Well, Tony Lloyd, thank you. I'm sure you will get a chance on the doorstep to campaign on those issues in the European Parliament elections. Well, let's come back now to the panel in the studio to discuss where all of this leaves the parties and indeed more broadly the state of our democracy. I mean, first let's start off with those European Parliament elections. Nick was saying earlier that they hope to do a deal, Jeremy Corbyn and Theresa May, so that they can go into them with something concrete. Do you think that would change the dynamic?
Change the dynamic of Euro elections? I mean, certainly, if a deal was secured, I mean, they'd be off, wouldn't they? So that would change quite a lot. I mean, the chances...
No, that may not be possible. That was Nick's advice, just in terms of the process that's now underway. But yes, I guess that's one possibility, is that the elections are are off, but if they continue, would a deal help them, do you think, on the doorstep? Or be toxic?
That's really interesting. I mean, there's the issue that obviously Labour membership is overwhelmingly pro-Remain, wants a public vote, wants basically just to stop Brexit. That's the main priority for the majority of Labour members. Now, that activist space is very important to get out the vote, to go door knocking. Labour really relies on those activists. So to lose them, or if they're dispirited, that would play into it, the Labour vote there.
Suzanne, how do you think, if they were able to initial a deal before the European elections?
Look, we've had a Prime Minister who has said hundreds and hundreds of times that we were going to leave the European Union on the 29th of March. A Prime Minister who said that no deal was better, a bad deal. Apparently she was talking in the abstract, whatever that means. People don't trust her anymore. People don't trust politicians. We've just seen that in this election. Whatever deal they come up with, if people can go to the ballot boxes and vote during the European elections, they're not going to trust anything either Labour or the Tories tell them, whatever deal they come up with. Nigel Farage's Brexit party has getting huge momentum. I've seen polls this week where he's polling 40% for the European elections. That's not going to go away overnight. The trust has gone. It's going to take a long time to get back. Are you personally going to support the Brexit Party in the European elections? I will. I mean, you know, Nigel's been pretty ghastly to me at a personal level, but yeah, I'm going to vote for him because I want to get out of the European Union, and there is no other choice.
What effect do you think it'll have on the Tories then? Because obviously that was an element that wasn't there yesterday, the Brexit Party.
I mean, it's going to be a wipeout for the Conservatives. I mean, there is no way this is going to go well for them. And like I said earlier on, it is probably going to be another referendum by proxy, which is looking like the Lib Dems now as a proxy for the Remain vote. That wasn't clear before the local elections. There was a debate over whether it was going to be Change UK or the Greens, but it looks like it will be the Lib Dems versus the Brexit Party, who have done incredibly well at establishing themselves and establishing their brand. Now, if the Conservatives did manage to get a deal together with Labour, I think that's probably unlikely, even though the talks are going along, but it doesn't feel likely to be moving in that particular direction that fast.
And I think...
Sorry, Polly, are you as confident as Laura is that you will be the choice for the Remain voter, or will Change UK...
I'm not standing,
the party? But
will
Change UK complicate that equation also?
I think it's certainly complicated because there's going to be all of these parties with a Remain platform on that ballot paper. But because the Liberal Democrats did so well in the last 24 hours, they've got a case to make, and the Liberal Democrats have a sort of, history of slightly ludicrous bar charts that they put on all their leaflets. And so there will be very strong messaging that says if you want to tell, send the message that you want to Remain, then the Lib Dems are the way to do it. But it will be messy and complicated. But of course, there will also be Leavers who vote for UKIP, Leavers who vote for the Conservative Party, Leavers who do all sorts of things. I think if the Labour and Conservative parties do somehow cobble together a deal, I think that would actually probably bring their vote share down, because it would inevitably be a slightly softer Brexit type deal, which would upset those residual Leavers who are still sticking with the Conservative Party. And it would mean that Jeremy Corbyn had just accepted that he was going to somehow pull through a Tory Brexit, and that would mean those Labour Remainer votes would probably want to lend their voice to the Liberal Democrats. So I think, therefore, the long-term political interest of them is to actually keep us in this holding pattern where they're pretending to discuss, eating a lot of biscuits, and not getting anywhere.
I disagree with that, because I think that actually the Conservatives are being hammered because they're not doing something. Theresa May has been very clear that she wants to get this withdrawal agreement through. That's her version of leaving the European Union, and we've not been able to do that to now. Labour, as these results have shown, are actually getting held accountable for that as well. So I think that their position thus far, which has been to try and straddle both horses, has been quite successful for them. But I think that's now reached the end of the road, and they need to make a decision one way or the other. And the longer that they don't do that, the longer that they lose votes from both sides.
But it comes back to that point Peter Carr was making in the film, which is that actually deciding which side of the road they're going to stand on will lose them more votes from one group or the other.
Would you share the view, Sonia, that I've seen some Labour supporters voicing today, that their position hasn't helped them in the Brexit voting north, and therefore it's not gaining them anything?
I mean, that's difficult. A lot of Labour Remainers are saying, well, if Labour's Brexit policy isn't strong enough to get those Leavers out in the north, then why have it at all? But obviously, those voters see Labour as a Remain party. That's why they're not going out for Labour in those areas. So it seems a bit of a flawed argument to me.
Is assuming that the European elections happen and are as bad for the two main parties as we think they are, adding in the Brexit party and the other elements, is it then a race to see which one of them dumps their leader first?
I mean, there's no way that Jeremy Corbyn is being dumped anytime soon. Absolutely
Even if it's
not.
a washout?
It's that, I mean, let's just acknowledge that polling actually shows Labour's going to do pretty well in those Euro elections. That might change, but at the moment, that's what it looks like.
It's an ironic, isn't it? We've got two major party leaders who are absolutely determined not to go anywhere. You know, Theresa May, stuck in the mud, effectively squatting in Downing Street, lost umpteen ministers, 30-something ministers, you know, all these councillors now. She will not budge. And Jeremy Corbyn, despite all the horrors that he's had to face as well, you know, his continuing affiliation with terrorist organisations, the anti-Semitism in the Labour Party and so on and so forth, he's stuck in the mud either. And the irony is that whichever party, Labour or Conservatives, ditched their leader and came out with a clear pro-Brexit message would actually clean up at the next general election.
I'm not sure that's true. You know, what's fascinating is this way that in 2017, the two parties, the two big parties, went right back up to getting, you know, 85% of the vote between the two of them. And that reversing a kind of trend that had been going on for 30 years of diversity and multi-party politics.
But it was because it was a Brexit issue, though, because it was about Theresa May. Are we going to have a Brexit party in power, or are we going to have a Jeremy Corbyn Labour Party that's not committed to Brexit? And I think
their manifesto was committed to Brexit. And they still, after people use on the Labour side,
so
routinely say, oh, 85% of people voted for Brexit remaining parties. I think actually the pathway for any party to a majority now is incredibly, incredibly difficult. We're going to have to get used to coalitions again. And, you know, turns out they weren't very popular.
On the leadership question, could the Lib Dems actually manage to switch in Jo Swinson, for example, before the European election day, 23rd of May?
No, they're going to run a 9-week or longer election campaign after the Euros.
But could she break through then between then and a general election and make that transformative?
I don't think a general election will happen this year, but yeah, I mean, you know, a new leader could help to sort of build on what Vince Cable's delivered for the Lib Dems over the last 24 hours.
I think it'd be interesting to see actually how the Lib Dems do in the Euros. A little bit of me thinks, I was talking about spoilt ballots earlier. If you don't want to go to the bother of going to the polling station just to spoil your ballot, you stay at home. Yeah. I do wonder if part of the Lib Dems' success has been because traditional Labour and Conservative voters just didn't bother to go out. I wonder if your joy is, I'm sure there is a Remain issue, but I think it might be a bit premature.
But in the end, all of those people get their seats and they serve in the council and then they act as the foot soldiers for the party. So the exact mechanics of exactly who stayed at home and who wrote what on their ballot paper fundamentally come down to who got elected and how does that change both the narrative
and the
activist space.
In terms of premature joy, that an election in which the Greens and the Change UK party are also contesting and fighting for Remain votes is a gift to Nigel Farage, isn't it?
Well, I suppose it is, yeah, absolutely. I mean, Change UK, they don't seem to have any policies, really. Nigel Farage doesn't have any policies except Brexit, but that is his hallmark. That's what's made him so successful.
High concept party.
A single-issue party. And again, as I say, we will see what happens in 3 weeks' time. But I think if you think last night looked like a bloodbath, my goodness, I think you ain't seen nothing yet.
Let's just, lastly, because time is inevitably limited, but talk about how this fracturing of parties is going to be represented in Parliament. Because, of course, we've seen before, like in the 2015 election, when the UKIP vote was nearly 3 million and they ended up with 1 MP, or the Green vote was about 1 million and they ended up... I mean, is this right? Does this feel right as these votes break down and millions go to other parties, that we're still essentially going to look to one of those two main parties to see if they can get some sort of majority?
Yeah, I mean, I think it depends. This whole problem of status and the two main parties not being popular, this depends how Brexit is handled, obviously. When is a deal going to be secured and passed in Parliament? So there's that. But also, I mean, in terms of electoral reform, if we're talking about that and getting rid of first past the post, then I'm not sure who's actually going to push for that and who's going to be in a position to get that through Parliament in any way, because the AV referendum, we saw that way.
Yes, it didn't work out brilliantly, did it?
No, I mean, that wasn't for proportional representation, but AV. But yeah, the fundamental challenge is that the only people who could introduce electoral reform are people who can win on the current system. So then it's not in their interests. I think we need to think about other more fundamental changes to how we run our politics.
I'm sorry, we are indeed out of time. Sorry about that, but I'm sure there'll be plenty to discuss on coming editions of Newsnight. That's all we've got time for. Just to correct a statement from Suzanne Evans in that discussion, Jeremy Corbyn isn't affiliated to any terrorist organisation.